Hello and welcome back to Aetheral Space 9.4, The Garden. We are back.
Yes, welcome. So last time on Aetheral Space, Muzazi was headed straight for the floor. The alcohol served its course. Something lyrics to Mr. Loverman, you get it. He's very sad. Also, the crew is sneaking onto a ship.
The Eliza.
And lastly, most importantly, Mila from Arc 2 talked to the leader of the Humanists, Gertrude Hart?
That's it.
Who was like a cat lady, and was like, free my girlfriend. She was like, lol, no, we need to keep the researcher on. So Mila was like, I'm gonna free you. Sorry, a bug
That's
just
what
flew
she
on
said.
my pizza. So she said, just you wait, babe, I'll free you. And that's everything, I believe.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. And then at the end, Muzazi was recruited by the Galactic Intelligence Division of Supremacy to destroy the final church, they said.
Yeah, and he was like, finally, the abyss I've been searching for. Rule orders. And I was very sad. There's a giant bug, and I want to eat my food, but I have to read this web serial.
Gene talented that bug to intimidate you. Do you like it?
I just want to eat it, and I know he's going to get on my fucking food. Anyway, so some of you may be asking, why should I ever listen to Aetheral Space? All these two idiots do is interrupt each other. But who's going to read the binary for you, idiot? Because I'm a cogitant, and I can interpret it into English.
With a single scan of his eyes. This guy.
Activating tech support. But the world of flesh was a fool's prison, and the architects of the time judged it distraction, as did the Apex Bishop, and said, let the garden be inner and outer, and let the shadows walk the rows. The liberation of the, Paradisus gardeners.
Oh yes, that's right.
You fool. New World Order. Muzazi gulped, his mouth curiously dry. Destroy the final church? He had passing familiarity with the GID, the spy masters of the Supremacy. But even for them, this operation seemed somewhat extravagant. From what he understood, their work usually involved the assassination of foreign nationals or the extraction of useful intelligence, not the destruction of enemy states outright. Was it really something that could be accomplished? But still, orders were orders. Lyons chuckled, raising his hands good-naturedly, but the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. What was Lyons' voice again?
It was sort of calm, a bit businesslike.
Oh, please, don't worry about that. I don't expect you to single-handedly blow up the entire final church or anything like that. I was just hoping you could help us out here and there. Like a part-time job or something. Muzazi straightened up, and once again went to rest his hand on a sword that was no longer there. You know what? I have a theory. Tan, have you ever read Unordinary?
I've read like the first chapter of it.
Okay, never mind. Then I can't use that example. I have a theory that the sword was like what kept Muzazi sane, and now that he doesn't have it as comfort, he's like slipping more and more. That is my theory. As a special officer of the Supremacy, he mumbled, still shaking off some of the liquor, I am duty-bound to assist. Please, what do you need? Please, give me something you need. Please, give me orders. Please, give me a reason to exist here. Please, please. He blinked blearily. How long had it been since he'd last slept? I'm glad you're so agreeable, Lyons said, leaning back in his seat. As I said, it's just a few small matters we need taken care of. Prerequisite conditions that need to be cleared before the main event, if you like. Blue light washed over him from the monitors surrounding his desk. When Muzazi glanced at them, he saw that they were displaying video feeds from numerous cameras throughout the True Meet. Crowds aboard the Menagerie, solemn gatherings aboard the Deus Nobiscum, empty corridors and server rooms aboard the Eliza. There were even shots from the outer hulls of the connected ships, observing the smaller vessels keeping orbit. One monitor, however, was completely black, save for the golden figure standing at its center, right at the core of the void. A figure with black armor and a one-eyed helmet, a shining sword in his hand. The man he'd seen back aboard the ruined Arrowhead. Negan Rush. Don't trust him, the long-dead swordsman said. You mustn't trust him. Was that Negan's voice?
I was a bit more sort of like normal person, but sort of like monotone, I thought.
Don't trust him, the long swordsman said. You mustn't trust him. Lyons blinked, cocking his head slightly. Do you have a query, Mr. Musashi? Musashi shook his head, rubbing his head with one hand. When he looked again, the screen was instead showing a feed from one of the menagerie's marketplaces. I'm sorry, he mumbled. It's been a tiring time for me recently, but it will not impact my performance. I'm prepared to do what needs to be done. Excellent! Lyons smiled, blue eyes twinkling in the dim light. The smile was short-lived, though, and his face soon fell into business-like neutrality. By the by, I understand your last reported activity was heading to the planet Panacea, with your partner in tow. I can't help but notice you are now alone, Mr. Musashi. A cold chill settled over Musashi's back, and his hands began to shake. For a second he could swear he still felt the grainy texture of that silent dust on his fingers. Yes, he whispered, staring down at the floor. Yes, there were circumstances. Jean Lyons did not blink. I think it's best if you explain to me exactly what happened, Mr. Musashi. Slowly, Musashi nodded, and he opened his mouth. So I know I haven't read much yet, but I really want to eat this dinner before the fly wins, so you have to read now, Tanhony.
Sure thing. For a long time, Mila had assumed that the majority of pre-Thousand Revolution's history had been tainted by the efforts of the era's propagandists, especially when it came to the Gene Tyrants. The way she saw it, there was simply no way beings such as casually cruel and eccentric as the Gene Tyrants of legend could have existed. They wouldn't be able to form a functioning government, for one thing, and it was unlikely that people so dysfunctional would have been able to advance the Gene Tyrants' level of technology in the first place. After meeting Dr. Clad, however, she'd started to question that view. Aether, the bald man sighed passionately, his arms spread wide as he pranced throughout the laboratory. A light of the mind. H. Guilford called it that in his famous memoirs. Did you know that, dear? I think it's an apt description too, but only at the surface level. His way of speaking.
This is the first time we've heard Aether called the light of the mind since the description in the Royal Road for Aetheral Space.
His way of speaking, speeding up and slowing down seemingly at random, was a stark contrast to his mundane appearance. Little more than a drab sweater, some pants, and an old lab coat. Dear? Dear, did you know that? Dr. Cloud repeated with a sudden sense of urgency, whirling around to face Mila. His eyes were nearly bulging out of their sockets. Did you know? Mila nodded, holding her script up to her chest. Yes, sir, you've explained this before. Oh, excellent, Dr. Cloud muttered, turning back around. Cloud's laboratory wasn't aboard the menagerie itself, it required more secrecy than that, but instead an anonymous ship flying separately, its signatures changed hourly. Despite that fact, however, space wasn't limited in the slightest. Gertrude Harp had spared no expense when it came to her pet's genetic engineer. The walls on one side were lined with consoles and analysis equipment, ready to receive any samples that prompted Cloud's curiosity. On the other side of the room, shelves were fully stocked with glass jars containing grotesque and short-lived specimens, brought into this world and taken out of it in this very same room. And then, looking down from the ceiling, was Helga's tank. Whenever she was here, Mila avoided looking up. Her fear she'd see open eyes glowing down at her. An irrational fear, but she still dreamed of it. For a long time, Dr. Cloud continued to prattle on, throwing himself back into a seat and putting his feet up. I actually despaired when it came to my Aether research. Did you know that? I actually despaired. Do you know why? Because there was no visible link between Aether and biology. No visible link at all. Mila,
oh my god, are we about to get some lore, Tan?
Mila nodded again, her eyes dull. She had the sneaking suspicion she'd heard this lecture many times before. For example, Dr. Cloud stuck up a single finger. Take my Aether core theory. It's entirely possible someone with, let's say, an atrophied or mutated brain to lack the ability to feel, let's say, romantic passion. But it's entirely possible for that same person to have romantic passion as their Aether core. What the Aether demands is entirely divorced from their biology. That's how you get people who are categorically unable to use Aether. Don't you find that vexing? Quite vexing, sir, Mila replied. What would you think of me now, Helga? I've become a lapdog. Not that you could judge me, you were a traitor after all. However, then I thought about it further, Dr. Cloud spat out at once, springing back to his feet. That frustrating fact actually opened up new realms of new possibilities for me. Doesn't that actually confirm, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Aether is an external resource? There is no organ or gland that produces it, and the body actively suffers from being overloaded by it. It's a foreign substance, an invader perhaps. It is accessed via a specific emotional key, which it seeks even if the subject is incapable of it. It's the light of the mind, after all, not of the brain. He rubbed his hands together as he paced back and forth, eager to release his excitement any way he could. But doesn't this also suggest that consciousness exists in some form separate from the meat of the brain? The very idea makes my heart fly. What could you call that if not the soul? As a scientist, and of course as a humanist, the very possibilities are... As usual, Dr. Cloud's rambling was gradually drowned out by a high-pitched ringing sound scraping through Mila's head. She'd served...
No, I want to hear more rambling. Please, Mila, please.
She'd served as assistant for the better part of a year, and through that time she'd heard these same rants over and over again. Sometimes they'd be delivered while he brewed up some genetic abomination in the vat, sometimes they'd be rolled off while he dissected the resultant corpse. But always the same ideas and theories over and over again. The repetition alone was enough to drive a person crazy. When Mila had first started working here, she'd felt a blazing fire burning within her, a passion to get Helga out of here, to find out what was really going on and to put things right. Those repeated speeches, the bloodstained days she'd spent helping Cloud, they'd smothered that flame down to a simmer. But now, today, she could feel some last little sparks leaping up. She had no doubt that Gertrude Half would contrive some excuse to get her away from here before long. Her conduct at the meeting would have made it obvious she was a potential security risk. If she was after to set Helga free, it would have to be before the true meet ended, so a week essentially. Her fist tightened to such a degree that it hurt. She had already made preliminary preparations, putting together funds and mercenaries to pull this thing off, but now that time had actually come to put her plans into action. The anxiety was suffocating. And can I do what you did onto me and popcorn this back now?
Yes, but I will take over the rest of this chapter for you, but you need to distract the audience for about a minute while I get a drink.
Absolutely.
Alright, I'll be right back.
So, viewers, are you enjoying Aetheral Space so far? Do you think this Dragon character is going to work? We've been here for a couple of chapters now, and I'm not sure about it. I think I'm going to do some rewrites and have Skipper be the main character instead. I don't think Dragon really works. It's just a couple of little edits. I'll just do like Control F for his name to switch it around to Skipper. I don't think it'll cause too many plot holes, but I don't know. You let me know in the comments what you think, and I will act accordingly. I thought he'd be back by the time I finish this bit, but he's still gone, so I'm just going to keep talking for a little bit. He's still not back, huh? So I'm sitting here in my room. I've got two dogs in the same room as me, both asleep.
One of them used to be human, you know.
Yes.
The other one, well, that's just a dog.
The other one
Welcome back.
was something else.
Oh my god, Gene Tyrant?
I'd say Gene Tyrant.
Joan Lion! Are they, though? Are they really?
It's a matter of perspective.
There's some philosophy thought for you. Are Gene Tyrants humans? Let us know in the comments below. Jean Lyons listened to Musazi's entire story without interruption or judgment, simply watching him with inquisitive, unblinking eyes. Those blue irises, the only trace of color on the cogitant's body, observed him like the lenses of twin cameras. And Musazi spoke. He spoke until his throat felt like fire. He spoke until his tears ran dry. He spoke until the shaking of his limbs had exhausted him to such a degree that all his body could do was hang limp, rendered little more than a puppet to his own speech. As he spoke, he left nothing out. He spoke in such detail that it was like he was reliving the whole thing again. I think you put relieving instead of reliving. He spoke of Dragon Hadrian, of the Repurposed, of the Gene Tyrant Renavalona, and of the battle that had taken place there. So is he just recapping Arc 8, or is he giving, the whole... Okay. And of course, he spoke of Marie. When his story concluded, his mouth continued to move, letting out useless gasps of air. The exhaustion had gripped him utterly, and as he collapsed to his knees, he felt as if he was going to fall unconscious, then and there. The floodgates of his grief had opened, and it felt for all the world like he'd just be washed away. He only remembered where he was when he felt reassuring arms wrap around him. Lyons, moving silently, had stepped over, kneeled down, and gently embraced him. "I see," Lyons said softly, his eyes closed. "That sounds like quite the horrible experience. It's been difficult, hasn't it, Mr. Musazi? This guy..." I'm getting a kid in the flashback. Sorry, I'm getting fucked up on 8 different levels right now. Musazi swallowed, his breath shuddering. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, it's been very, very difficult." In that dark room, with the 4 walls seeming to crush in towards him, The only thing the toy Musashi could hear was Jean Lyon's quiet, calm voice. My wish is to make a less difficult world for our supremacy, Lyon said, rubbing Musashi's back in comfort. A world where our people don't encounter such sad situations. Toy Musashi, will you lend me your strength? Yes, Musashi breathed. Of course. Thank you so much. Lyon stood back up, helping Musashi to his feet with a gentle hand. Musashi let out a sigh. He didn't know why, exactly, but he felt much stronger now than he had just a few minutes ago. The opportunity to speak of everything he'd been through had done him a world of good. But now, the time for tears had passed. Toy Musashi hardened his frivolous mind back into steel and stared forward with resolute eyes. What would you have me do? He asked again, crossing his arms. Lyons threw up a holographic display with a wave of his hand, the screen flipping around to face Musashi. On it was an image of a black woman with a worried expression, walking through a garden of some sort. She was wearing the patchwork attire typical of humanists, with a bag slung over her shoulder. Mila Green, Lyons said by way of explanation, getting back into his chair and crossing his legs. She's a medical doctor working for the humanist branch of the Final Church. Musashi nodded. What of her? She's part of a group within the humanists that have captured and detained one of our agents, Lyons explained. I don't have all the details, but sadly it appears this agent has been subjected to human experimentation. They're making an effort to match the Superbian's skill in the field of genetic engineering, it seems. Musashi looked down at Lyons, his eyes wide with concern. Genetic engineering? So this human experimentation is... Lyons nodded grimly. It is of that variety, yes. It's a disturbing phenomenon. The further we advance, the more paths back to the time of the gene tyrants present themselves. Personally, it sickens me. Memories of Ranavalona in his monstrous form bubbled up in Musashi's brain, and his fists tightened furiously in response. No matter what, he would not allow a sight like that to exist again in this world. We believe the laboratory itself is on an off-site ship, but this woman occasionally travels to the main menagerie for supplies. You and Olga will capture her and have her take you to the ship in question. An easy task, all things considered. Musashi furrowed his brow. Olga? He asked. Who's Olga? Do we know her?
We do not know Olga.
Olga! Spoke a high-pitched voice in monotone from right beside Lyons. I don't know how to do high-pitched in monotone. I'm gonna need some lenience.
Okay. Sort of emotionless but high-pitched.
Olga!
Yeah.
That's the best I got.
Well, isn't a little less like a Pokemon saying the name, maybe.
I don't know! This is high...
Let me try
high-pitched in monotone?
Olga.
That's not high-pitched. That's just your voice.
Olga. No, that's even more like a Pokemon.
Olga! Alright, we have to read the story now.
Okay.
I'm just going to figure it out as I go, and you're going to have to accept it's imperfect. A jolt of alarm, a reflexive leap into a combat stance, but a combination of Lyon's raised palm and Musashi's lack of weapon quickly calmed him down. His eyes flicked over to the new figure. A young girl, clearly barely into her teens, stood next to Lyons. A dull look in her dark blue eye. Oh, this is fucking Noelle. This is so Fuck you, this is Noelle, Tin. You're not fooling me. Alright? This is Noelle. Stood next to Lyons, a dull look in her dark blue eyes. How long had she been there? Had she been there the whole time, right in the open, and Musashi just hadn't noticed? If that was the case, she was certainly skilled at concealing her presence. She was wearing a black raincoat, the surface of it bulky enough that it was surely concealing armor, and a bright red scarf was wrapped around her neck, covering her mouth. The scarf was obscenely long, enough so that it was wrapped several times around her throat, and still had enough length to trail across the ground behind her. In contrast, the blonde ponytail that hung limp from the back of her head was barely long enough to even qualify as such. Olga, she repeated, nodding. Nice to meet you. No, that's not monotone. Nice to meet you. And you as well, Musashi responded automatically. By far, she was the youngest operative of the Supremacy he'd ever seen. The girl looked like she should still be in school, to be perfectly honest. But if the Supremacy had decided her being here was right and proper, he was of no mind to protest. Olga here is one of our best and brightest, Lyons said, with more than a hint of pride as he patted her on the shoulder. She has some personal investment in this mission, but don't let that concern you. Her loyalty to the Supremacy is without equal. Olga clasped her gloved hands in front of her. I look forward to working with you, she said quietly. Please, treat me well. It was strange, but Musashi got the feeling that she was speaking in rehearsed phrases, little coming out of her mouth except etiquette and formality. To put it bluntly, she gave him the creeps. No doubt it was a little cruel to think that of such a young girl, but that was simply the impression she gave. Personal investment? Musashi asked, turning back to Lyons. Of what kind? Was Olga from Yaslav? Because I swear that name's familiar.
The name was in Arc 2. I will not divulge where the context.
That needn't concern you, Lyons said mildly, and yet in a tone that permitted no argument. I used that same line earlier when I was writing something so based. At any rate, that is your mission. The next time Mila Green walks on the menagerie, track her down, covertly apprehend her, Lyons smiled, and bring her to me. Alright, can you take it for a bit?
This guy's fake as fuck. He said he'd read the chapter, but okay.
Okay, give me a minute to take a drink then. Goddamn, my throat hurts. Yeah, you had to hear all that on mic because Tan is the greedy beast. Who's Hamashtiel again?
Well, Skipper has mentioned this person. This is the person he's wanting to sneak onto the ship to meet with. To, get help
Hamashtiel. I gotcha. Hamashtiel took in a deep breath through his nostrils and felt wet sand beneath his toes. As he looked down the length of the golden beach, he saw no trace of civilization or infrastructure. There were only dunes of sand, the occasional scuttling crab, and the soft waves of water trickling past his feet. The sun hung low on the horizon, dyeing the planet in orange glory. In the original memory, there had been a ship here too, but Hamashtiel had decided to erase it from this recreation. It would spoil the landscape, after all. Hamashtiel Narada had come to this uninhabited planet with his son once, and now Hamashtiel took on a child's form as he walked that same shore. Everything seemed so much bigger from this small shape, every distance so much more insurmountable. He wondered if this remembered weakness was where the feeling of wonder came from. He reached down with a small hand and scooped up some of the salt water, enjoying the sensation of the liquid against his skin. It was simulated, of course, just like everything in the garden, but Hamashtiel liked it all the same. It wasn't as if he had much else to compare it to. Right now, he was in a private instance within the garden, a virtual world that was the pride and joy of the Paradisus. In truth, it was more like layers and layers of worlds, piled on top of one another, designed to accommodate the whims of its inhabitants. And then, of course, there was what those layers formed a shell around. Hamashtiel banished the thought from his mind. It would only depress him anyway. At any rate, that was how Hamashtiel walked a beach that no longer existed. From what he understood, an industrial accident 10 years ago had reduced this place to a wasteland. This beach had become little more than a toxic reef, and yet the memory of it remained unblemished within the garden. Improved, even. An alert popped up in the back of his consciousness, informing him that the time to meet with Mr. Mestrelin was approaching. He'd been conducting negotiations with the mining magnate for some time now, and was confident he'd be able to close a deal with this final meeting. Mestrelin's product would be extremely useful in expanding the garden's server infrastructure. The task had been assigned to him by Apex Bishop Asmagius. Is it Asmagius or Asmagius?
Asmagius.
Apex Bishop Asmagius himself, and Hamashtiel had no intention of disappointing. The logout process from the garden began, and the beach disintegrated around him. First, chunks of the ground began to collapse in on itself, leaving black and empty voids. Then, even the sky began to crack and shatter, shards of it floating up into an identical void. I imagine this is like in Assassin's Creed, like that gray room when you kill someone. In the moment before the logout was completed, Hamashtiel could see the ocean floating free, unburdened by geography or geometry, until it, too, fell into the abyss. Gotta say, Ruth frowned, scratching her head, this doesn't really feel like a religious kind of thing. Well, Skipper cracked his neck as he adjusted his tie. The Paradisus like to do things their own way. I guess living inside a video game makes you lose touch with the outside world, yeah? Hey, Adrian, how am I looking? Like you've murdered that tie, Dragon replied truthfully. I think you look fine, Mr. Skipper, Serena smiled sweetly. Maybe not good, but yeah, fine. The four of them were in an elevator heading to the main floor of the Eliza's welcome reception. Only a few floors of the Paradisus ship were open to visitors, so they planned to infiltrate the party and then use Gemini World to proceed to the room they actually needed. From what Skipper had said, this party was something of a suit and tie affair. And so, Dragon had spent the last few excruciating hours at a tailor on the menagerie. He really didn't get paid enough for this, but in that he didn't get paid at all. He adjusted his own red bow tie, brushing some of the inevitable dust off his black suit. He swore that the thing was a size or so too big for him, but they hadn't exactly had the time to get anything individually fitted. Unsurprisingly, Skipper would put a greater deal of time and effort into his own attire. If not for the green tie that he'd mangled, and indeed now ripped off and stuffed into his pocket, he'd cut quite the striking figure. A black waistcoat with a green trim over a white dress shirt. With his dark hair tied back into a ponytail, he almost looked like he could have been a businessman rather than a menace. He almost looked like he could have been old Musashi. Serena was wearing a pink and white dress with a smile on her face, thoroughly made up. Even with the high heels she was wearing, she was hopping up and down on the spot without any signs of difficulty. Needless to say, Bruno had made himself scarce. Ruth, to be blunt, looked like a caveman that had been thawed out of a block of ice and stuffed into a dress. She continued to scratch her head in annoyance, slouching, and despite the fact that they were meant to be in disguise, she'd refused point blank to abandon her combat boots. "How do you know where this meeting's taking place anyway?" Dragon asked, glancing up at Skipper. Skipper tapped his nose. "Oh, I have my ways, Mr. Adrian." Ruth snorted, adjusting the strap of her dress for what felt like the 5th time that minute. "He probably broke into that Mestrelin guy's house or something, stole his schedule." She too looked up at him. "Right?" Skipper smirked. "Breaking in implies I left evidence. I infiltrated." "Fantastic." Dragon raised an eyebrow. "And without telling any of us about it, too. What if you had been caught? We'd all be screwed." "Well," Skipper waved a dismissive hand, "I took that into account. Don't worry about it." Dragon rolled his eyes. As per usual, Skipper was making moves without telling anyone. There were only so many times he could wave that hand of his before it got old. But perhaps the time for that confrontation was not on an elevator in the Paradise's headquarters. For the time being, Dragon would keep his mouth shut. There was a ding from the elevator, and the doors began to slide open. Dragon gulped. Time for the party. Okay, I need to see art of these characters all dressed up immediately. Calling all Aetheral space artists. I need this in my life. Yeah, good chapter, Tanner. I felt like there were a lot of directions here, and I don't say that in a bad way. I don't think it really lost focus. I think every section had enough time, but it was like it felt a lot longer than it was. But I say that in a good way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, quite a few different viewpoints.
Yeah, very, very interesting. What do I have to ask you after recording what Olga is? Because I know I recognize that name. I know I do.
Okay.
You can't run it past me. It's too unique of a name. I'm like, I've heard this shit in Aetheral space before.
I'll tell you later.
Okay. What's your fun fact this week?
Fun facts. This is unrelated to the events of the chapter, but the Supremacy's government consists of 3 branches.
You already told us this one.
What are they then?
I don't remember, but I know you've said it. It's common knowledge.
Fine, follow that.
All right, fine. Say it again, but you have to come up with a new one too. I'm not letting you.
Okay. Well, there's the civilian government, which is the ministers who meet in the body. Currently governed directly by the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd ministers. Then there is the actual military, which is directed in sort of standard affairs by the Ascendant General. And
yeah,
then,
he's the one that like actually runs shit. Like
yeah,
the
on the
Supreme
logistics
says what he
level
wants,
of
and then the
shit.
Ascendant General does it. Yeah.
And then there's the Supreme, who has sort of unilateral authority, and if you want something, essentially the civilian government becomes accommodating how to do that, and the military becomes how to actually execute it.
So what I'm hearing is it's sort of like the 3 branches of the U.S. government, but like if the president had all the power, kind of, rather than a check and balances.
Exactly. It's like
now,
every order is the executive order.
Now give us our new fact.
The new fact. Well, I didn't realise I already told you that, so give me a question and I'll answer it.
To be fair, you might have told me that in private and not on like the wider
This
world.
guy is so fucked up.
Okay, let me think of a good question. Give me a second. Alright. Okay. I can't ask it because I know you'll say it's a spoiler, but I want to ask so badly. Let me think of something else.
I'll give you one. The humalists have by far the greatest population of scurrants in the galaxy. Because in ye olden days, there was a lot of sort of discrimination against currents, so they all sort of banded together under that one umbrella.
I have one for you.
Okay. You get so many fun facts
sorry,
in it. You're so lucky.
What are there any surviving period pieces of our modern time today that like exist in Aetheral space universe, like period videographs? And if so,
there wouldn't be.
What is a prolific one? There's no pieces about the Lost Ages and what they imagined it was like?
No, at this point, the Lost Ages that they have are the future for us.
Mm-hmm. Damn. That's sad. I remember he joked, I hope he joked, because otherwise I have to do some thinking, but he was like, the last thing they remember is trains, and then everything after that's the present.
That was interesting. I was saying, like, videograph-wise, the earliest one they have is, like, one of the train going towards the screen, and it skips forward to, like, the far future.
That's so fucked up. Jack and Jill and Click survived. I know they did. Click, at least. Surely.
Yeah, but no, the conceit is sort of like, our time is irrelevant to Aetheral Spaceland.
Yeah.
It happened,
they don't care
but it's
about
not
it.
relevant.
Do they still... Are they still interested in ancient civilizations like Egypt and Rome and stuff, or do they just not give a fuck at all anymore?
Not really. Like I said, that is... What is...
Well, some people give a fuck, right? There's got to be archaeologists and, like, history nerds.
Well, it's all bombed to shit anyway on home, so they're not... Well, yeah, but the archaeologists these days in Aetheral Spaceland are all about sort of gene tyrants and pre-gene tyrant civilizations, things like that. They're not going to go to nuclear wasteland home to look at the spot where
You're
the pyramids
murdering my
used to be.
protagonist right now. You're murdering my protagonist. Do you know that?
I'm sorry.
I now have to make this story not... It's not going to be lore accurate because my guy's a history nerd about home. Why would you do this to me? How dare you? Why?
I gave you so many fun hints, though. Fun facts.
You know what? I've decided that fun fact isn't real. I've erased it from my memory.
This fact wasn't very funny.
It no longer exists. Only speaking of it can make it real. Alright. Well, thank you guys for listening, and thank you again for the chapter, Tanhony. It was a real treat. I enjoyed it. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.